The boy's name was Leo. He was 15 years old, thin as wire, with eyes that had learned to watch without hoping. His denim jacket hung loose over a frame that hunger had carved down to bone. He had not eaten in 2 days. Most nights he slept pressed against the hospital's exhaust vents, where steam leaked warmth into November air that cut like glass. Sometimes orderlies left him alone. Sometimes they didn't. That night the rain came sideways, cold and mean, turning the streets into rivers that swallowed heat and light. Leo crouched near the emergency room entrance, water streaming off his hair, shivering so hard his jaw ached. He wasn't asking for anything. He never did. He just existed in the margins, watching people rush past holding umbrellas and car keys and futures he couldn't imagine. Inside one sterile room on the 4th floor, doctors stood frozen in a silence heavier than prayer. A baby girl lay motionless on a hospital crib. Maya Sterling, 10 months old. Tubes snaked from her tiny arms. Machines that had been screaming minutes before now flatlined into a single endless tone that filled the room like a verdict. Her chest did not rise. The lead physician stared at the monitor, then slowly reached for the silence button. The alarms died. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely louder than breathing. "Time of death, 9:47 p.m. The sound that followed was not a scream. It was something worse, a collapse. Marcus Sterling, a construction foreman who had worked double shifts for 8 months straight, sank to his knees beside his daughter's crib. His work boots were still caked with mud from the job site. His flannel shirt, the same one he'd worn for 3 days because laundry felt impossible, hung, wrinkled, and stained. 2 years earlier, he had buried his wife after a drunk driver ran a red light. Since then, he had been fighting to keep the lights on, fighting to pay medical bills that climbed faster than his wages, fighting to be enough for the tiny girl who was all he had left. His hands gripped the metal railing so hard his knuckles went white. He pressed his forehead against the mattress and stopped breathing himself, as if he could follow her into the dark. A nurse moved quietly toward the machines, reaching to disconnect what no longer served a purpose. That was when Leo slipped inside. No one saw him at first. The door had been left cracked by someone stepping out to make calls. Leo only meant to stand there for a moment, just long enough to let the heat touch his skin before security noticed. Hospital smelled like his grandmother's last week alive. He stayed near the wall, shoulders hunched, making himself small the way he had learned to survive. But then he saw the baby. Leo did not understand ventilators or infection protocols. He understood bodies. On the streets, survival meant noticing the smallest shifts, the way a breath changed before someone stopped breathing, the twitch in a hand before someone swung. He watched from the shadows as adults moved with the slow resignation of people who had already accepted the ending. And then he saw it. A flicker. So faint it could have been imagined. A tremor at the corner of Maya's mouth. Leo's heart slammed against his ribs. He leaned forward, pulse roaring in his ears, watching her chest. There again. Not a breath. Something trying to become one. "She's not done," Leo said. His voice cracked through the room like breaking glass. Every head turned. A doctor swore under his breath. A nurse stepped forward, already reaching for security. "Get him out of here," someone barked. "Now." Marcus lifted his head, his vision blurred until the room shrank to just the boy standing there, soaked and shaking, eyes locked on Maya with a focus sharper than grief. For one heartbeat, Marcus saw himself reflected in that stare, someone desperate enough to believe in something no one else would. Before anyone could stop him, Leo lunged. He darted past, reaching hands, ignoring shouts and alarms and the sudden crush of bodies. He didn't know what he was doing. He only knew what he had done once before, when his grandmother's breathing went shallow and desperate, when cold water shocked her back for seconds that felt like miracles. It wasn't medicine. It was instinct, carved from loss. He scooped Maya into his arms and ran straight for the sink. "Don't!" Marcus shouted, his voice breaking as he staggered forward. Leo twisted the faucet, Cold water spilled over his hands, over Maya's face, her chest, her tiny arms. His own hands shook so violently he could barely hold her. "Come on," he whispered, fierce and pleading. "Your dad's still here. You hear me? Fight!" For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Maya coughed. Water sprayed. Her body convulsed. A thin, furious cry tore from her throat and filled the room like a siren no one thought they would ever hear again. Welcome to Dad's Redemption Stories. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. If you want to see what happens next, hit that subscribe button, because what follows will change everything you think you know about second chances. Chaos erupted like a bomb had gone off. Monitors flared back to life. Numbers climbed on screens that moments before had shown nothing but flat lines. Nurses surged forward, hands reaching for Maya, for Leo, for anything that made sense. A doctor shouted orders that no one could hear over the baby's cries. Security guards pushed through the doorway, radios crackling, eyes scanning for the threat they'd been called to contain. Leo stood frozen, water dripping from his arms. Maya clutched against his chest. Her cry was thin and wet and furious, the sound of something clawing its way back from wherever she had gone. He didn't move, couldn't move. His legs had turned to stone. "Give her here," a nurse said, voice sharp with urgency. She didn't ask. She pulled Maya from Leo's arms with practiced efficiency, already turning toward the crib, already calling for oxygen levels and vitals checks. Leo's hands hung empty in the air where Maya had been. He stared at them like they belonged to someone else. Marcus hadn't moved from his knees. He watched the nurses work with the stillness of a man who had stopped trusting miracles. His daughter was crying. That sound, that impossible, beautiful, terrible sound filled the room, but he couldn't let himself believe it yet. Believing meant the possibility of losing again. The lead physician bent over Maya, stethoscope pressed to her tiny chest. His face was unreadable, carved from the same professional stone that kept doctors functional through disasters. He listened, checked the monitors, listened again. When he finally straightened, his expression had cracked just slightly at the edges. "Heartbeat steady," he said quietly. "Oxygen saturation climbing. Respiratory response present." A younger doctor stared at the screens like they were lying. "That's not possible. She was flatlined for—" "I know what she was," the lead physician interrupted. His voice carried weight that silenced the room. "Run a full panel. CBC, metabolic, chest X-ray. I want to know what we're dealing with." Marcus finally stood, legs shaking beneath him. He moved toward the crib where Maya lay, surrounded by hands adjusting tubes, checking monitors, stabilizing what shouldn't exist. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose and fell with breaths that were hers, not the machine's. He reached out but stopped himself, afraid that touching her might break whatever fragile thread had pulled her back. "Mr. Sterling," a nurse said gently, "we need space to work." He stepped back, nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. That was when he remembered the boy. Leo was still standing by the sink, flanked now by 2 security guards. One had a hand on Leo's shoulder, not rough, but firm, the kind of grip that said, "You're not going anywhere." Leo's eyes were locked on Maya, watching the rise and fall of her chest like he was counting each breath to make sure they kept coming. Marcus walked toward them. The security guards tensed. "Wait," Marcus said. His voice came out hoarse, scraped raw. He saved her." "Sir, we need to remove." "No," Marcus said it louder this time, with the kind of authority that came from having nothing left to lose. "He stays." The guards exchanged glances. Protocol said remove the unauthorized minor who had just assaulted medical equipment and interfered with hospital procedures. But protocol also didn't account for dead babies coming back to life. The lead physician looked up from Maya's crib. He studied Leo for a long moment, the soaked clothes, the trembling hands, the hollow stare of someone who lived in spaces people didn't look at. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "Did you do this before? The cold water?" Leo nodded once, barely. My grandmother. When she stopped breathing, my mom showed me. It worked. For a little while. Mammalian dive reflex, the physician said, almost to himself. Cold water triggers bradycardia, redirects blood flow to vital organs. In infants, it's more pronounced, but he trailed off, shaking his head. It shouldn't have worked. Not after. Not this far gone. A nurse checking Maya's the4 spoke without looking up. Her temperatures dropped 2 degrees, core temp 66.3. The physician's jaw tightened. He turned back to Leo. You could have killed her. Hypothermia. Aspiration. Cardiac arrest from shock. But he didn't, Marcus interrupted. His voice broke on the last word. She's alive. Silence settled over the room like snow. The only sounds were monitors, beeping steady rhythms, and Maya's small, persistent breaths. The physician looked between the homeless boy and the grieving father and the baby who had violated every medical certainty he'd built a career on. Get him a blanket, the physician finally said, and someone find this kid some dry clothes. One of the security guards released Leo's shoulder and stepped back. The other hesitated, then did the same. Leo didn't move. He just stood there, water pooling at his feet, staring at Maya like if he looked away she might disappear again. His lips moved without sound, counting breaths only he could hear. Marcus stepped closer. Up close, Leo looked even younger, just a kid with old eyes and older scars. What's your name? Leo. Leo. Marcus repeated it, like he was memorizing something important. Thank you. I don't know how to. His voice failed. He pressed a hand to his mouth, trying to hold back everything that was breaking loose inside him. Leo's eyes finally left Maya and met Marcus's. For just a second, something passed between them. Recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to watch someone slip away. A nurse appeared with a hospital blanket and draped it over Leo's shoulders. It was thin and scratchy and warm. Leo pulled it tighter, still shivering. Mr. Sterling, the lead physician said quietly, we need to talk about what happens next. Marcus turned. The doctor's face had shifted into something careful and sad. The infection is still present. Her immune system was already compromised. What happened tonight bought us time, but... He paused, choosing words that wouldn't crush hope completely. She's not stable. The next 48 hours are critical. If her condition deteriorates again... I understand, Marcus said, even though he didn't. Even though understanding felt impossible. Across the room, a monitor beeped, sharp and urgent. A nurse leaned over Maya's crib, checking connections. The sound stopped. False alarm. But every head had turned. Every breath had caught. The physician met Marcus's eyes. She could still crash. If you're holding your breath right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment and let us know, are you Team Leo or Team Doctors? And hit subscribe, because what happens in the next 48 hours will break you. The first night felt like holding water in cupped hands. Maya's condition stabilized, but stabilized was not the same as safe. It was a word doctors used when they meant, we don't know what's happening, but at least she's not dying right now. Nurses rotated through in shifts, checking monitors that beeped with rhythms. Marcus had learned to read like a second language. Every spike sent his heart into his throat. Every dip made him stop breathing. Leo refused to leave. At first, the staff tried to move him. A social worker appeared around midnight with kind eyes and forms on a clipboard. Asking questions, Leo answered in single syllables. Name, age, parents, none. Emergency contact, none. Current residence. He didn't answer that one. She tried to explain about shelters and youth services and protocols, but her voice faded into background noise when Maya's oxygen level dropped 0.5 percentage point. Leo stood. The social worker stopped talking. Marcus, slumped in a chair by the window, watched as Leo moved closer to the crib. Not touching, just near. Like proximity alone might matter. And somehow, impossibly, Maya's oxygen climbed back up, 0.3, Point 5, point 7. The nurse monitoring the display frowned, checked the equipment, checked it again. That doesn't make sense, she muttered under her breath. But it kept happening. Every time Leo stepped out to use the bathroom, to accept food from a nurse who'd taken pity on him, Maya's numbers slipped. Not dangerously, just enough to register. And when he came back, they stabilized. The medical staff documented it with the careful precision of people who didn't believe what they were recording, but couldn't ignore the data. By 3 in the morning, the lead physician pulled Marcus into the hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in the sickly blue-white that hospitals seem designed around. The physician looked exhausted, gray stubble shadowing his jaw, eyes bloodshot from a shift that had gone 30 hours without sleep. "I can't explain it," he said bluntly. "Medically, there's no mechanism for what we're observing. Infants don't stabilize based on proximity to specific individuals. It's not how biology works." Marcus crossed his arms, less defensive than defeated. "But it's happening." "Yes." The physician dragged a hand down his face. "It's happening, which means until we understand why, or until her condition improves independently, I can't recommend removing him from the room." Marcus looked through the window into Maya's room where Leo sat curled in a chair, the hospital blanket pulled around his shoulders. He hadn't slept. His eyes stayed fixed on Maya's chest, watching it rise and fall like he was personally responsible for each breath. "Can he stay?" Marcus asked. The physician hesitated. "Officially, no. Hospital policy doesn't allow unauthorized minors to remain in patient rooms overnight, especially without parental consent or guardianship." "And unofficially?" A pause. The physician looked at Maya through the glass, at the numbers on her monitors, holding steady in ways they hadn't before. "Unofficially, I'm not removing the only variable that's keeping her alive." By dawn, word had spread through the ward. Nurses came up with excuses to check on Maya, their eyes lingering on Leo with expressions that ranged from curiosity to unease. A respiratory therapist brought Leo a sandwich from the cafeteria. A janitor left a clean set of scrubs folded on the chair beside him, child size, but close enough. Leo accepted both without speaking, the sandwich disappearing in 4 bites, eaten with the mechanical efficiency of someone used to not knowing when food would come again. Marcus tried to talk to him. Small questions, gently asked. "Where are you from? How long have you been on the streets? Do you have family?" Leo's answers came in fragments or silence. "New York." "A while." "No." But when Marcus asked, "Why did you help her?" Leo finally looked at him directly. "I know what it's like," Leo said quietly, "when nobody sees you dying." The words landed like stones in deep water. Marcus opened his mouth but found nothing to say. What could he say? That he understood? He didn't. He had a job, a home, a life that, however hard, however buried in debt and grief, still existed in the world's eyes. Leo had none of that. Leo was invisible by design, a consequence of systems that didn't work and people who looked away. A commotion near the nurse's station pulled Marcus's attention. Raised voices, a doctor gesturing urgently. Marcus stood, pulse spiking, and crossed the room in 3 strides. "What's wrong?" The nurse at the desk looked up, face tight with controlled concern. Maya's white blood cell count just spiked. Infection markers elevated. "We need to start aggressive antibiotic treatment immediately." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Is she?" "She's still stable," the physician said, appearing beside them. "But this is what we feared. The initial infection never cleared. Her immune system can't fight it alone." He was already moving toward Maya's room, Marcus following, Leo looking up as they entered. The physician examined Maya with quick, practiced movements, listened to her breathing, checked her temperature. When he straightened, his expression was carefully neutral. "We're going to try a different antibiotic cocktail. Stronger, broader spectrum. There are risks, her system is fragile, but without intervention, the infection will overwhelm her." "Do it," Marcus said, immediately. Nurses moved with choreographed precision, hanging new IV bags, adjusting dosages, monitoring reactions. Maya fussed, a thin cry that sounded more exhausted than distressed. Leo leaned forward in his chair, hands gripping the armrests. "She's fighting," he said softly. Marcus looked at him. At this kid who had nothing, who slept in alleys and survived on scraps, who had somehow noticed what trained doctors missed. "How do you know?" Leo's eyes never left Maya. "Because she's still here." The hours crawled. Morning light filtered through the blinds, gray and weak. Marcus's phone buzzed with texts from his foreman. Third day he'd missed work. Bills didn't stop because the world ended. But he silenced the notifications and stayed. Around noon, a nurse checking vitals paused, frowned, checked again. "Doctor," she called, voice carefully controlled. The physician appeared, read the monitor, and his eyebrows rose fractionally, the most emotion Marcus had seen from him. Temperatures dropping, WBC count declining, oxygen saturation holding at 94%, without supplemental increase. "Is that good?" Marcus asked, afraid to hope. "It's better." The physician studied the data like it might reveal secrets if he stared long enough. "The antibiotics are working faster than expected." Or, he trailed off, glancing at Leo. "Something is—" But even as relief started to uncurl in Marcus's chest, the physician's expression remained guarded. He pulled Marcus aside, voice low. "This is progress. Real progress. But Mr. Sterling, you need to understand, even if the infection clears completely, even if her numbers stabilize permanently, we're still talking about an infant who was clinically dead for several minutes. There could be neurological damage, developmental delays. We won't know the full impact for months, maybe years." Marcus absorbed the words like blows. "But she's alive." "Yes." The physician's face softened slightly. "She's alive." A sound from across the room made them both turn. Leo had stood up, swaying slightly, one hand braced against the wall. His face had gone pale, eyes unfocused. Marcus moved fast, catching Leo's arm before he could fall. "Hey, easy. When's the last time you slept?" Leo blinked slowly, trying to focus. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're about to pass out." A nurse appeared with a cot, already unfolding it in the corner. "Lie down before you collapse and give us another patient." Leo looked at Maya's crib, hesitation written across his exhausted face. "She'll be okay for 20 minutes, Marcus said gently. "I'll watch her, I promise." Leo wavered, then nodded. He sank onto the cot and was unconscious within seconds, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of someone whose body had finally stopped fighting. Marcus settled back into his chair. Through the window, the city moved on, people working, living, unaware that in this one small room, the impossible had happened and was somehow still happening. He watched his daughter breathe, watched the boy who had saved her sleep, and for the first time in 2 years, Marcus prayed, not for God to change things, but just to let this moment last. A monitor beeped. Steady, regular, alive. Then it skipped. The physician's head snapped up. Marcus's heart stopped. The beep steadied, then skipped again. Numbers on the screen began to drift downward. Oxygen saturation, 93. 92. 91. The physician moved toward the crib, already reaching for his stethoscope. "Wake the boy." This is where everything changes. Comment "breathe" if you need Leo to wake up right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment, because what happens next will destroy you. Marcus shook Leo's shoulder. "Wake up, now." Leo's eyes snapped open, already alert in the way people learned when sleep was never safe. He saw Marcus's face and was on his feet before his brain fully caught up. Maya's monitor beeped irregular patterns that made the air feel thin. The physician had his stethoscope pressed to Maya's chest, listening with the concentrated stillness of someone reading a language written in heartbeats. Leo moved to the crib without asking permission. He didn't touch her, just stood close, and whispered something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Maya's breathing evened out. The monitor steadied. 92, 93, 94. The physician straightened slowly, stethoscope hanging loose around his neck. He looked at Leo the way scientists looked at data that broke their equations. "How are you doing that?" Leo shook his head. "I'm not doing anything." "Then why does she stabilize when you're near?" "I don't know." Leo's voice was barely audible. "Maybe she just knows someone's watching." The physician opened his mouth, then closed it. After a moment, he just nodded and walked away, leaving questions that had no medical answers suspended in the air behind him. That was when Marcus understood. Leo wasn't staying for 48 hours. He was staying until Maya didn't need him anymore, or until someone made him leave. The hours bled together. Day turned to night, turned to day again in the fluorescent sameness of the hospital room. Nurses brought meals that Marcus barely touched, and Leo devoured with the quiet desperation of someone whose body didn't trust tomorrow. Marcus watched him eat, noting things he hadn't noticed before. The way Leo positioned himself with his back to the wall, the way his eyes tracked everyone who entered the room, the way he flinched when doors closed too fast. "How long have you been on the streets?" Marcus asked during one of the quiet hours when Maya was sleeping and the world felt small enough for honesty. Leo didn't answer right away. He was folding a napkin into smaller and smaller squares, his hands needing something to do. "Since I was 12. "What happened?" "Foster system." Leo's voice was flat, scrubbed clean of emotion. "Some homes were okay, some weren't. I ran from one of the bad ones. Figured the streets were safer." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "And your parents?" "Mom died when I was 8. Dad was never around." Leo finished folding the napkin and started unfolding it, creasing each line with precise pressure. "My grandmother took me in after that. She tried, but she got sick and there wasn't money for treatment and housing both. She chose housing, kept me fed, until he stopped. Swallowed, until she couldn't anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the things Marcus suddenly understood. Why Leo knew to use cold water. Why he noticed the breathing pattern no one else saw. Why he couldn't leave Maya alone even when his own body was shutting down from exhaustion. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it in ways that went deeper than words. Leo shrugged, but the gesture looked practiced. Armor disguised as indifference. Everybody's got something. Over the next day, Maya improved in increments. The infection markers dropped. Her temperature normalized. She stayed awake for longer periods, eyes tracking movement, tiny fingers grasping at nothing. The staff started using words like remarkable and unexpected recovery, but they still watched the monitors like people waiting for the other shoe to drop. Leo stayed in the corner, present but separate. Marcus brought him things clean, clothes from the hospital donation closet, books from the waiting room, a phone charger even though Leo didn't have a phone. Small gestures that Leo accepted with the wary gratitude of someone used to gifts with strings attached. On the second night, Marcus woke to find Leo standing at the window, forehead pressed against the glass. The city lights below made his reflection ghost-like. "Can't sleep?" Marcus asked quietly. Leo didn't turn. "I keep thinking she's going to stop breathing. The doctors say she's stable now. Doctors said she was dead." Leo's voice carried an edge Marcus hadn't heard before. Not anger. Something rawer. "What if I leave and she—" "Then you don't leave." Leo finally turned. "I can't stay in a hospital forever." Marcus stood, crossing the room until he was beside Leo at the window. Below them, the city moved in rivers of headlights and shadows. Somewhere down there was the alley where Leo had been sleeping 3 days ago. The thought made Marcus's stomach turn. "You could stay with us," Marcus said. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, he didn't want to take them back. Not at the hospital. "At my place. It's not much one-bedroom apartment in Queens, but the couch pulls out and—" Why would you do that? Leo interrupted, and there was something almost like fear in his voice. Because you saved my daughter's life. That's not a reason to. Because I know what it's like to be alone, Marcus continued, voice steady. I know what it's like when the world takes everything and expects you to keep standing. And I know what it's like to need someone to see you. He paused. And I see you, Leo. Leo's jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't know how to swallow. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What if I mess it up? Then we figure it out together. The silence stretched. Leo looked at Maya sleeping peacefully in her crib, then at Marcus, then down at his own hands, like they belonged to someone he didn't recognize. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Just once. But his eyes, those old, tired eyes, in a 15-year-old face, held a question he didn't ask out loud. How long until you change your mind? Marcus saw it, and didn't have an answer that would sound true yet. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent to small miracles and fragile promises made in hospital rooms at 3 a.m. The adoption paperwork took 6 months. Social workers asked questions Marcus didn't always have answers for. Background checks revealed a construction foreman living paycheck to paycheck in a 1-bedroom apartment with medical debt he'd be paying off for years. Not ideal conditions for taking in a traumatized teenager. But they also revealed a man who showed up, who had sat vigil beside his daughter for 72 hours straight, who was asking to give a homeless kid a future when most people just looked away. The caseworker who finally approved it was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a coffee stain on her blouse. She slid the forms across the desk and said, "Don't screw this up." Marcus promised he wouldn't. He screwed it up anyway, not catastrophically, but in the small ways that accumulate, like water damage. He didn't understand why Leo hoarded food in his closet, even after Marcus showed him the full pantry 3 times. He didn't know what to do when Leo woke up screaming from nightmares he refused to talk about. He lost his patience when Leo shut down emotionally for days at a time, retreating into silence so complete it felt like living with a ghost. The first time Leo tried to run, it was over something stupid, a disagreement about curfew that escalated because neither of them knew how to fight, without it meaning abandonment. Marcus came home from work to find Leo's few belongings shoved into a trash bag by the door. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice level. "Leaving before you kick me out?" Leo wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm not kicking you out. You will eventually. Everyone does." Marcus set down his lunchbox, sat on the couch. "I'm not everyone. And yeah, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say the wrong thing and set rules that don't make sense and probably forget important stuff because I'm working 60 hours a week and barely sleeping." But Leo, he waited until the kid finally looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Not unless you want to." Leo's hands shook on the garbage bag. "What if I don't know how to do this?" "Then we figure it out. Together, like I said." The bag stayed by the door for 2 days. Then it disappeared back into Leo's closet. Neither of them mentioned it again. Progress came in pieces. Leo stopped flinching when Marcus raised his voice, started eating at the table instead of hiding food, learned that anger didn't mean violence, and mistakes didn't mean eviction. Maya became his anchor. She learned to walk holding Leo's fingers, said his name before she said "Dada," which hurt Marcus's feelings for about 5 seconds before it made him smile. Therapy helped, the kind covered by the state, with a counselor who specialized in trauma and didn't flinch at Leo's silences. School was harder. Leo had missed years of consistent education, and catching up felt impossible some days. But he showed up, and Marcus showed up to parent-teacher conferences in his work clothes, smelling like sawdust and sweat, asking what his son needed. Years passed. Maya grew from a baby who had died and come back into a little girl who laughed too loud and asked too many questions. She adored Leo with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who had never known a world without him. And Leo became someone Marcus almost didn't recognize. Taller, healthier, present in ways that went beyond physical proximity. He graduated high school, applied to community college, got accepted into a respiratory therapy program on partial scholarship. "Makes sense," he told Marcus when the acceptance letter came. "I already know how to notice when people stop breathing." The night of the storm, Maya was 7 and Leo was 22. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled windows. Lightning turned the apartment white. And Leo, home from his clinical rotation, folded in on himself at the kitchen table, breathing too fast, eyes unfocused. Maya found him there. She was old enough now to understand that sometimes people broke in ways you couldn't see. She climbed into the chair beside him, took his hand the way he'd once taken hers, and whispered the words he'd used in that hospital room a lifetime ago. "Breathe. I'm watching. You're not alone." Leo's breathing slowed. His eyes focused. He looked at the little girl who had been dead once, who had taught him that coming back was possible, and he breathed. 3 years later, Leo walked through the doors of the same hospital where he'd once slept beside exhaust vents. But this time, he wore scrubs, with his name embroidered on the pocket. This time he belonged. He worked in pediatric respiratory care. He noticed the things other people missed, the slight changes in breathing patterns, the subtle signs that machines couldn't catch. And when doctors gave up, when numbers flatlined and hope died, Leo stayed. He watched. He believed in invisible possibilities. Because once upon a time, in a cold November rain, someone had believed in him. And love, he learned, transfers. Worth endures. Protection is restored. Thank you for watching this story with us. If it moved you, hit that subscribe button and check out our other videos on the Dad's Redemption Stories channel. These stories matter, and so do you.